Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you live to episode number 13 of the Primetime Rundown Zoom interview series, a byproduct of the Eastern Observer's main podcast, the Primetime Rundown, right here on the aforementioned Eastern Observer and the Blackjack Media Networks. We cannot be thankful enough for Jaden Daly, the Daly Dose of Hoops creator, to be joining us here this evening on this gorgeous Monday evening, Jayden. And I do apologize for pulling you inside on this, like I said, on this gorgeous night.
It was pretty much in for night anyway, so you kind of did me a favor. Now I got something to do for the next few minutes.
There you go. So that I'm really glad you actually were muted for I think the first 2 seconds. So I believe we did get you. But we're here now. We're good to go. So again, thank you very much for being here. For those that do not know who I am, I'm Joey Jarzynka. I know I did not say that in the open, but I think everyone knows who I am 13 episodes in. So really appreciate everyone joining us here and getting to know who Jaden Daly is. For those that are just tuning in for the first time from the Seton Hall basketball page, we cannot thank you enough. We actually did this morning blast this all throughout the Pirates pages, all throughout the Red Storm pages, everywhere that Jaden is affiliated with, including Iona, Fordham, everywhere in the MAC too. So we'll see if we can get a plethora of followers or viewers to potentially ask Jaden a bunch of questions. Also, for those that do not know, this podcast is all about the people that I have met, both friends and colleagues that I have met along the way. Jaden is a beloved friend of mine. Really glad and blessed that he's come into my life. Has really helped me along my path. And I think we've given each other tips and pointers throughout the way. So again, now with all of that spiel being said and done, Jaden, let's get into who you are and what you have done to get to where you are today. So first off, how are you and your mom doing during this whole quarantine?
Well, working for the city as both she and I do, I'm actually going into the office, and it's been my salvation the last 2 months, to be honest with you, Joe. You know my personality, and for those of you who don't know, I'm naturally extroverted. It kills me to stay away from people, so that's been my biggest challenge. Mom's been working from home the last couple of months, so she's away from the action, but in more of the action, so to speak, because she's dealing with a lot more from a remote location. But other than that, really, it's no different from any other day, just a little more inconvenient, but nothing, thank God for this, nothing too damaging.
Right. And not only that, too, the biggest thing that a lot of people say is that, you'd rather be working from a remote location, wherever it may be. And as an essential worker, too, you're extremely blessed and grateful and lucky, all of the above, to be working from a remote location as an essential worker. So really good stuff. So now going to your personal self, being a Monsignor McClancy alum. And for those that do not know, just a few weeks ago, or I believe 2 weeks ago, actually, we had Chicago Cubs hitting coach Anthony Iapoce on the broadcast. And he's actually also a Monsignor McClancy alum as well. So now that makes 2 McClancy alums on the Primetime Rundown Zoom interview series. So for McClancy, for you guys that could be watching, that's 2 for you. So if you have any other prospective people or candidates that would like to be on the show, you know where to reach me. Jayden, class of 2004. We all know how things have gone for you, where you are the Daly Dose of Hoops. I always say Daly Dose of Hoops. Daly Dose of Hoops creator. And to start off, when you were in high school, was there a focus of where you wanted to be in terms of radio, in terms of media? Obviously, we know that you created Daly Dose of Hoops about 5 years following your high school graduation, towards the latter part of your tenure at St. John's. But like I said, going back to McClancy, was there a focus or a drive towards the sports field, or what was it? Did you have the opportunities in Queens?
Not at all, actually. The way it was set up, it wasn't even a thought to broadcast or anything, and they had a couple of teachers doing PA for whatever basketball or whatever kind of games they did have at home. But honestly, I was out of there at 2:30 every afternoon, and I was home by 3:30 playing Madden. So if I got into sports, it was of my own doing. There was really nothing at school to really pique my interest, so to speak. I got a very late start in our career field. It wasn't until my senior year of college, 2007, that I threw myself into the fire, so to speak. And you know what, Joe, honestly, there are days where I wish I started earlier, and there are days where going in cold was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. It doesn't matter where you start, when you start, or how you get involved. It's what kind of an impact you make and how much of an impact you're able to make right away. You get what you put into it. I really do believe that. And really, you're the master of your fate and the captain of your soul in any industry, especially this one, as you and I both know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, the biggest thing that I look at is, you get what you put in, which is 100% the truth, because really, if you don't go for it, or even work for it, nothing is handed to you for free, unfortunately. It's simply, that's just, it is what it is. So regardless, Jayden, of the late start, you still got to where you wanted to go. And you were saying about, you wanted to play Madden, you wanted to do whatnot, whatever it was. Now, why St. John's? So because obviously you were saying that you got the late start, were there other prospective schools that were possible destinations for you, or was it St. John's the whole time?
Not until several years later, when I realized in retrospect what I could have done. When I was 17, 18 and out of high school, I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, honestly. And initially, when I was a kid growing up, a Michigan football fan and a North Carolina basketball fan, I was thinking, yeah, I'd probably end up going there and watching all these games either for free or for however much student tickets were at the Big House or at the Dean Dome. And then I got a little older, a little more mature, and I didn't want to be too far away from mom. So St. John's is 15 minutes away. By bus, it's only a half hour. So it was the convenience factor. And of course, knowing now what I wish I knew then, everything would have been so much different. I look at Hofstra, I look at Seton Hall, I look at Fordham, I look at Syracuse, I look at Maryland, schools that are within the area on the Eastern Seaboard with highly regarded journalism and communications programs that have track records of placing alumni in high profile positions in the industry with some high profile connections as well. You look at Syracuse and it's like a who's who. You have Marv Albert, Ian Eagle, Mike Tirico, Sean McDonough. And then you look at Fordham with Mike Breen and Michael Kay, Bob Papa, Seton Hall even with Bob Lee, Dick Vitale. And then Maryland as well. Kevin Blackstone, who was on Around the Horn, actually directs the journalism program there. So things I wish I knew in 2003, 2004 that I found out several years into my career in the industry probably would have changed the course, but can't cry over it now. And I'm trying to make the best of what I've tried to fight for over the years.
Well, not only the certain trajectory that, the plan that the plan that really is from above, and, where you are now is really unbelievable, because a lot of people, Jayden, they don't go to not only as many basketball games as you do in a single season, which you and I have had that conversation before of, you and I actually had a mini, it was like a little mini competition of how many games we could get to in a single season. And actually, I think I was on pace for almost 75 when COVID hit. But that was just this year alone. And I remember when you and I first met, and for those that don't know how me and Jayden met, I was calling a game for WSJU, St. John's University Radio Network, and that was at baseball, or at Jack Kaiser Stadium for baseball. And Jayden was in the booth doing it, I believe, for RedStormSports.com or ESPN3, one or the other. And I remember I walked up to you and I said, hey, you know, whatever it was, and we were talking for a little bit. And I remember you were the infamous Jaden Daly. And I remember hearing all about you. You know, everyone saying, oh my gosh, look at this. You know, he's a proud alum. I've heard our you know, Mark Gurney, a former professor of mine, who I consider a dear friend and a mentor. You know, he's spoken about you before because, you know, there's not many people in our, I would say, even on the, you know, in the St. John's lineage, there's not many people that have gone from being a sports director at SJU or WSJU to following their dream and journey, you know? So really, really good stuff. Obviously you and I had met there. But you speak about the Fordhams of the world. You speak about, you know, with Vin Scully, Bob Papa, the aforementioned Michael Kay, of course. And, you know, you have a lot of these guys here, Bob Lee, Dick Vitale, you said him, from Seton Hall, from everything. And regardless, Jayden, you look at, you were saying you look at the path that you took, and it may not have been the greatest one, but regardless of what it is, you have to think to yourself, you go to so many games and you do what you love to do. It's not a job. It's what you love to do when you wake up every single day and you say to yourself, well, I think I'm going to go have a great game and go write about it. And I'm going to go do it from my personal site, which is yours, and go to so many games and do what you love to do and just do this travel. Talk about that, Jayden, and talk about how that really has transformed you into the Jaden Daly of today.
You know what, Joe? When I started Daly Dose of Hoops 11 years ago, I never thought that I would get 10% as much as what has come out of it 11 years later. You look at 2009, and I started the site from the back office of the WSJU studio. True story. Trying to kill time before our year-end formal event. And I put two quick pieces up that day. It was after Harry Callis, the legendary former voice of the Phillies, had passed away. And then John Madden announced his retirement that same week after he and Al Michaels called Super Bowl 43 for NBC. Now, at that point, I was just writing about anything sports related, no real sense of direction. Took a few more months for me to get college basketball centric. And then a year or so after that, it was a leap of faith. I wanted to expand beyond St. John's because I had some philosophical and creative differences with someone I was writing for at the time, Dave Krupinski, who had the Johnny Jungle site. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's a forum, it's a site, it's a bunch of different things. It's redmen.com's counterpart, so to speak. And he and I had some differences of opinion, direction. And I thought, well, maybe because I've already done men's and women's games at St. John's and I have enough contacts in the field, maybe I can branch out a little bit. And sooner or later, one thing led to another. Iona started credentialing me. I did some games of Fordham. And then after that, Manhattan, Hofstra, and some of the other local schools. Seton Hall came a couple of years down the line, but I had remembered a lot of the people in the office from my time at SJU Radio and had kept in touch. Networking, as you know, Joe, is the key in this business. I'm the type of person that if I meet you today, 50 years from now, God willing, if you're still with us, I'm still going to remember you. Well, you may have to mention your name to me again, but I'll remember who you are and what you've done.
Right.
And I think that's really tried to guide me. I've kept that in the back of my mind as I've branched out and blossomed into so many things. I always say this site is like the child that I don't have, and it really is. It's not necessarily a full-time job, but it's a labor of love. It's like raising a kid. It's 11 years old. It's about to come of age pretty soon.
Yeah, but yeah, it's true. And you know what? And almost about to actually be bar mitzvah too, if you think about it. And you know, it's wild, you know, become an official adult. But you gotta realize though, is that, you know, and a lot of people that don't know, you know, exactly, you heard Jayden's road, and you know, it was the not knowing part and eventually making those network connections. For those that are watching and for those that do not know, it takes a handful of connections to eventually get to where you want to go to. It's not only one, but again, it can only take one. You never know, and it could be that needle in the haystack that could eventually open that door. And for you, it was obviously that one to eventually open the door for Seton Hall. We'll get to that in a second with Seton Hall because like I said, for those the Pirate Nation that most likely is watching, thankfully I was actually just credentialed for more than one game this past year. I'm extremely blessed because of the connections that I made as well. But again, that's a conversation for later. Still at St. John's though. So we know why you went there. You wanted to be close to home as opposed to the others. You didn't know exactly what you wanted to do till your senior year. Now, when did you have your eyes set on WSJU, Jayden, and how did it become that you eventually became the sports director?
Well, the semester before I actually joined it, the back end of my junior year, I interned at FAN. I interned with the advertising and traffic department and really getting ad space and programming which spots run on which show at which part of the day and whose program. And obviously through that, I got to know some of the on-air staff, some of the producers behind the scenes, and I tried to leverage it into another internship before I graduated. Obviously, having college radio experience was essential. So the following semester, I kind of threw myself into the fire. I knew SJU Radio was on campus. I had seen the gigantic letters out the back window of the fourth floor of the studio, so I knew it was there. And the first month of my senior year, I basically just started getting to know people. And as it happened, the sports department was in a massive transition. The prior director had graduated, and there were only maybe 2 holdovers left from the previous year. So I really threw myself into the fire. And then October 3rd, 2007, I'll never forget this. I had the opportunity to co-host with the man who ended up being my co-director for the first semester until he graduated, Reginald Bazil, who's a man of many talents and does a lot of stuff behind the scenes for a few different stations in the area. And then a month later, I was calling a basketball game. And sometimes I feel like I was spoiled by such a meteoric rise, but I try not to let it get to my head. I was in the right place at the right time, I feel like, where in a lot of other college radio programs, you have to pay your dues and you'll learn a lot more of the other side of the industry. With the way SJU was set up when I got there, where sports was almost non-existent and really changing regimes, I was doing 2 different things at once. I knew what it took to not only get on the air, but the background and the planning of doing something actually on the air with people listening to you and really trying to tune in, even though we didn't have much of a signal at the time. But I think that really helped me out in the long run. I was better off for it by being in the right place at the right time and getting that valuable experience early, because it made up for the deficit that I had not getting into it until I was 21.
Yeah, well, you look at the teams that you were able to cover. You were able to cover a St. John's team that was led by Norm Roberts, 2007, 2008, 2009, 16 and 18, 6 and 12 in the Big East. For the people that are watching that know me, where I work now, St. Francis College, Brooklyn, Glenn Braco was an assistant there. He's currently the head coach in Brooklyn now, in Brooklyn Heights now. 17 and 16, 2009 and 10. They made the NIT the first round, I believe. That was when Steve Lavin, or that was Norm Roberts' final year. I believe that was year number 6. And then Steve Lavin took over the year after. So that was right around the time that you had left. Well, actually a few years after you had left. But that's just a little St. John's little tidbit there. So now, when you were a part of St. John's, Jayden, and now that I know, because actually I didn't know that it was towards the back end of your junior year and most of senior year, did you ever travel or did you just do strictly home games?
We only did home games my senior year because there was a misunderstanding between the people that were there before me and what we knew, that they couldn't broadcast any home games because they thought when ESPN Radio had the rights to St. John's that they had the exclusive rights, which was not true. So the student station didn't do any men's games the year before I got there, which was my junior year. I kind of brought that, me and my co-director brought that back. And the only real road trip we made was after I graduated in 2008, the following season. We went to the Prudential Center and watched Jeremy Hazel go for 31 points on St. John's in a 9:00 game on a Thursday night in February. I wanted to go to Notre Dame, but there wasn't enough room in the budget because the station manager blew it on South by Southwest and sent all the music department to Texas. And my spring break trip to Indiana didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? And it's very funny, Jayden, that you bring up something along those lines, because you know what? Now we can be transparent. You know, now we're on my channel here. So now I can say it. And, you know, no explicitives, nothing. Basically what, you know, we could have traveled as well. And you said it, you know, it was blown from the music department. Well, guess what? It was blown with the news department. It was blown with the music department. It was blown with the DJ. It was blown with everything. And sports came last. And, you know, and when I threatened certain things, you know, and like I said, I'm fully transparent right now, you know, when I threatened certain things because I had made the connections within the sports department, you know, some people didn't like it. And unfortunately, you know, and this is what you think, you know, what you've said, what a lot of other people have said is that, you know, both me, you, John Perez, Kevin Connolly now, and Brendan Myers, Anthony Tornatore, we've brought it back from the dead, you know, and it was, you know, right after you, Jayden, it almost died. You know, the whole sports department almost died. Not only that, also, but the relationship between the student radio station and the athletic department was almost was non-existent. The trust factor was not there. You would have, you know, people doing, or students doing, you know, let's say bad things. You know, we'll keep that PG. You know, they wouldn't even broadcast the game. So I do apologize for getting off on a tangent there, but so if that was the case, now obviously the next question would be, if you did travel, what would be your favorite road building? So I guess the answer would have to be the Prudential Center, because that was the only road building that you guys actually went to.
Yeah, it was the only one we could get to.
All right. So with that being said, so now obviously we move into your tenure at Brooklyn Heights. So for those that do not know, Jaden Daly, when I was actually looking back through a whole bunch of records at St. Francis when we were trying to clean up that department, I saw Jaden Daly's face everywhere, and I couldn't believe it. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, Jayden did say he was in Brooklyn Heights. So you got to St. Francis College, Brooklyn, and I want to know how you got that gig.
Through an email from Ralph Bednarchik, who got me my first professional gig doing St. John's baseball, and Ralph's a Hofstra alum and an offshoot of Mark Ernay. So it all goes back to Mark. And as a student of a sports broadcasting class back in 2007, he's kind of my patron saint in the field, so to speak. And I know he's going to crack up if he hears this, and he's going to shake his head, but it's true. And Ralph Bednarchik had sent an email that he got from Mark Fratto, who was the former SID at St. John's, who's now gone on to bigger and better things. He's now the PA voice of the Washington Wizards, among his many talents.
Yep.
But he forwarded the email to me. St. Francis was looking for a one-off PA announcer for its women's basketball home finale against Central Connecticut at the end of February. Brian Morales, who's a good friend of yours and mine, who's now at Wagner, was the point of contact there. So I reached out to Brian, dropped him an email, told him I'd be interested. He calls me back the next day. I get over there the day after. And apparently, I made enough of an impression for them to bring me on almost full-time the following year, and I stayed there the next 4 years.
That's wild.
It was really a leverage thing.
Yeah. Well, you know what, though? But you know what? It's crazy what one email drop can do. And, you know, and especially, you know, with Brian Morales, you know, I don't know if you're watching, buddy, but you see, it's really a small world, you know, with whatever it may be, because I was in his position, and now, you look at it and you say to yourself, wow, that was Jayden. Now, how many years ago was that? And I don't want to, point out your age here, but how many years ago was that?
Oh, you can go ahead. I'll be 34 in August.
I wasn't going there.
This was at the beginning of 2010. So from 10 to 14.
10 to 14.
6 years ago now.
10 to 14, that was under head coach John Thurston. So that was...
And Brendan Milano before him.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yes, I do. Yeah, that's true. So you had Brendan Milano, you had John Thurston covering that. Now, did you do any men's games, or was it just strictly women's for you?
I got to be thrown in on a handful of men's games. There was some... My last year there, I did more men's games than I had in the prior couple, but I did some men's games. And obviously, having known Glenn from my time at St. John's, his first year with Norm was actually my freshman year. So we knew each other, and I think that helped out a lot too. Yeah,
for sure. Absolutely. When you have a mid-major like St. Francis, and as they say, small college for big dreams, it's the truth, because really you can get started in such a small place like that and eventually get to where you want to get to, a la Jaden Daly, because look where you are now. So you also had a little experience with someone that actually works for the Rocklands, now New York Boulders, and Sirius XM Satellite Radio, Seth Cantor. Talk about your experience working with someone, who has the resume that he does now, and just generally working with someone who eventually made it up the ladder.
Yeah, Seth is probably one of the more underrated broadcasters in our area. Not to say that he hasn't made it big, because he surely has. He's been the voice of the Boulders since their inception in 2011. I was fortunate enough to fill in on a couple of games for him that year while he was on his honeymoon. And my relationship with him actually has a common thread in Ray Martell, the former FAN producer who's now at WOR. Ray and Seth worked together on Merchant Marine football games, and then we'll get into that a little bit later too. But I had actually met Seth for the first time in my St. Francis audition, so to speak, that one-off PA game that I got through a couple of fortuitous emails, and he and I stayed in touch after that when the following season started. And then after Ray had left Merchant Marine, he was looking for a color analyst. My first year at Merchant Marine, 2011, he was looking for a color analyst for one road game at Maritime, and then most of the home games out on the island. He asked me if I'd be interested. Obviously, I was. I hadn't done football because St. John's dropped it when I was in high school. It was a challenge that I wanted to take on, and one thing led to another there.
That's wild. So again, that is the whole circle of how you went from St. Francis, or actually from, let me get this straight, from St. John's to St. Francis to Kings Point and United States Merchant Marine Academy. Really, really crazy stuff. And it all had to do with one man. Well, actually two, if you think about it. You had Ray Martell and you had Seth Cantor. Really, really good stuff. So that was your time working with Seth. Clearly good stuff. Now, when you did women's games for staying in Brooklyn Heights for a second, when you did some games, you did public address, but were you also on the call for some of these games? Or
yes, I was.
Okay, so you did color and you also did some sideline stuff, if I'm not mistaken?
I've actually never done sideline in my career.
Wow.
I did some color and I did some play-by-play. I have never done sideline in 13 years as a broadcaster, believe it or not.
Wow. Well, that's something on the bucket list, I presume?
Yeah, if the opportunity pops up, especially, hey, maybe on a MAC game. I've had fans come up to me and say that they should bring me in, and I'd be all for it, but it's not up to me. I'm not the powers that be.
Well, I will tell you this, and we'll get to this later, but I'm surprised that I have not seen you on any ESPN Plus or ESPN3 game in any MAC contest yet, Jayden. And ever since I've known you, and ever since I've known your affiliation with the MAC, I've always thought, where's Jayden? Why are you writing? Why aren't you on the call? Why aren't you doing something? Because the amount of knowledge that you have with the MAC, Jayden, is something that really speaks for itself. So again, and I know I keep doing this. It's similar to The Last Dance, and I know you've been watching. I've been following, your tweets and everything. We go from 98, we go all the way back to 1984. So let's
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, nothing wrong with that at all. Because the documentary was fantastic. We'll get to that later. But yeah. So we go from the Merchant Marine Academy back to Brooklyn Heights for one more second. Now, your best moment working on Remsen Street at St. Francis College, Brooklyn.
Well, there weren't that many, and that's because the success of the basketball programs wasn't where we would have liked it to have been. Things happen. But I guess it would have to be the win over LIU at home in 13-14, which was the one year that I got to do a lot of play-by-play from men's games. Seth had taken a year away from he had got a job at Trenton Thunder doing corporate sales that season. So the broadcast kingdom, so to speak, at St. Francis was left to myself and Jason Garrett, who we'll get into my backstory with him also. He ended up replacing me on a lot of women's games and doing some PA for men's games. But the LIU home game where I was on the call solo, it was on Front Row until they cleaned up the archive. I don't think it's available anymore, but it's probably somewhere in the bowels of your office at St. Francis. There exists an audio recording of that game from 2014, and it was probably one of my better calls at the time too. I wrapped up a nice little halftime pre-tape with Vin Parisi the week leading up to it, and that came out really well as well. So Glenn Breaker finally being able to crack the code. He had yet to beat LIU as a head coach before that night, and St. Francis really took its formative steps. Of course, the following year won the regular season, and if not for a missed shot at the buzzer that would have sent it to overtime, could have beaten Robert Morris for the title that year and finally broken through to the NCAAs. But I think that was the defining moment in 4 years in Brooklyn, I would have to say.
Well, it's really, it stinks because, you were 1 year away from seeing the women's team win the Northeast Conference and get absolutely slaughtered by UConn. But hey, listen, you were close. You were 1 year off. Jason Gret obviously got to see that, but,
Actually, it worked out. Sorry to cut you off. It worked out in a way because I had the call from Manhattan's MAC championship defense in 15. So I got the championship call a year later, but just at a different school.
All right. Well, that's fair. And your relationship with Manhattan we'll get to in just a moment. So I think that really between you and I was just a wee bit better than what it would have been at St. Francis. Now we know how you got to Kings Point, the United States Merchant Marine Academy, through Ray Martell and Seth Cantor. So we got that. Now, you call football, and this past year you were still doing it. Now I think we're going on to year number 5, Jayden, or 6?
10.
Year number 10.
10.
10. Wow, my goodness.
2011 was when I started with Merchant Marine.
So year number 10, Jaden Daly, the voice of the United States Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point, up on Long Island, all the way up north, way north, or literally up north. Now, your best moment. Speak about that.
I think the last couple of years when Merchant Marine switched conferences, went from the Liberty League to the newly established NUMAC, New England Women's and Men's Athletic Conference, became more of a powerhouse. The triple option offense was a little more in vogue and caught some opponents off guard. The success started to come. A couple of come from behind wins, a couple of dominating wins. There was one against, I can't even remember. When you've done so many games, Joe, sometimes you forget. I think it was WPI, which has always been a thorn in Merchant Marine's side. And it was a 20-point comeback a couple of years ago where Merchant Marine got a touchdown in a 2 and got the lead. Also, before that, 2013, I think it was, against RPI, a kicker by the name of Jake McDonough gave me my first and so far only true buzzer beater, kicked a game-winning field goal as time expired. So I think it's a tie between those two.
Okay, well, that's pretty good. And in 10 years, I'm sure that there are tons more memories that, or, a few more memories that you'll have to dig deep into the archive of your brain there, and you'll eventually get it because, you are a smart mind, and I'm sure that, like I said, there are plenty more big moments. And you know what? And I'm actually going to throw you on the spot here. What about your first ever broadcast for US MMA?
That was actually with Seth Cantor. I was doing color. It was a game up at Maritime, where the Maritime SID, Joe Guster, who's now with me at Merchant Marine, he and I actually knew each other from St. John's. We were undergrads together, and then he worked under Fratto while I worked at SJU Radio. So it's all intertwined. That was a low-scoring game, 2 triple option offenses. Game took like an hour and a half to complete it. It flew. I want to say 14-7 or something like that was the final score. It was like Army Navy at the D3 level.
Wow, that's and to say something like that, and to put Army and Navy in the same sentence as that really must be something good. So now we go to Daly Dose of Hoops, and so US MMA came in 2010. You were already, you said 2010. So you are now 1 full year in with Daly Dose of Hoops.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know how you got there, and it all was from Harry Callis, but then also with John Madden talking about his retirement. So in college basketball, you said it was not the primary sport for you right away.
Not right away, no.
So you look at what Daly Dose of Hoops has done for you now. Your Twitter account has almost 6,000 followers, if not more.
That's unbelievable.
Which is absolutely surreal. 6,000 people, Jayden, follow you. 6,000 people know who you are. They want to know what Jaden Daly knows. They want to know more about Iona, about Fordham, about Manhattan, Hofstra, St. John's, Seton Hall. We had you on the Primetime Rundown last week, and we were talking a little bit about Georgetown. Mm-hmm. We were talking a little bit about the Big East in whole. We were talking about Seton Hall. We were talking about UConn and how Adama Sanogo is going to be he actually said no to Seton Hall and said UConn because he felt that the NBA was a better path to go or to get to the NBA to go through UConn and with Danny Hurley. So with that being said, your affiliation with the MAC, how did it all start where you became the MAC Jesus?
Well, I thank you for putting me in in that stratosphere, because I've never let anything get to my head. So to be considered such a luminary is something that means the world to me.
All right. Well,
it's hard to put me at a loss for words, Joe, but I think you did it.
Listen, I'll tell you one thing. How about this? How about the Messiah of the MAC?
Yeah, nice. It's still incomprehensible in a way, but I'll tell you how it started. Going back to 2011, where I was looking to stretch out beyond St. John's just to prove I could do it. Nick Guerrero, who was my old producer at St. Francis, was an assistant in the SID office at Iona. And Brian Byer was, and still is, the men's basketball contact there. I reached out to him to see if I could cover a few Iona games. The first one that was convenient for my schedule was Iona and LIU in the November 2011. LIU at the height of its 3 straight NEC championships, Jason Brickman, Julian Boyd, Jamal Alasware. Iona that season ended up getting the at-large with Tim Cluse, Mike Glover, Momo Jones, Scott Machado on that team. And apparently my Iona coverage was good enough to warrant a return trip for a few more games that season. And it got to a point where I was one of the few consistent presences there. John Rothstein used to go up there every night before he made it big too. That's actually where I got to know Rothstein, from press row at Iona games, along with Sean Brennan, who was at the Daily News and now does a lot of stuff with the Big East. Howie Kasoy was covering Iona and Manhattan for the Post before he moved on to Bigger and Better. And then through Iona, I applied for the MAC tournament credentials in 2012 in Springfield. Got that, went up there for the day, and then left the Iona Fairfield game that I covered at the 4-minute timeout in the second half, went down to Hartford and covered what turned out to be Kim Barnes-Arico's last game at the last Big East game at St. John's, won the Big East tournament game. And then St. John's went to the Sweet 16 later on. She got the job at Michigan. The rest is history there. And my travel has taken on a life of its own too. I think the three biggest things that people know my brand for are the fact that I go to all of these games without driving. If it's commutable, because I don't have my license, I never needed it growing up in Queens. If it's commutable, I'll go to it. That, the game count, and the fact that I know the officials more than anybody else in the room.
Yeah, you do. So that's unbelievable. So and now that you say that, and you've gotten there by public transportation a lot. So which is, or the only way, which is fantastic, because I've seen you go to hundreds of games. And for those that do not know, Jayden, if I'm not mistaken, the most or the maximum amount of games that you went to in one season was over 100, if I'm not mistaken.
141.
141. So for those, so I'm not now, and now we actually need my co-host Nick Partain here, who is a math guru, so he would be able to tell me. But 141, and college basketball season is how many months? October?
5 months, roughly.
5 months. So if I'm not mistaken, that's basically a game a night. That's a game.
Almost.
That is, I believe, just about a game a night, which is absolutely amazing. So 141 games, and now I've heard and I've seen you scale it down a bit, because you want to stick to a few. You want to stick to a few of the games at St. John's, or even not even at the alma mater, but at Seton Hall, because right now they're at the height of where they should be. And obviously amid the whole COVID thing, we have no idea where they could have gone. They could have been at Madison Square Garden at the Elite Eight. We have no idea. We'll never know. So now at Seton Hall, you've gotten your connections, and we now know how you got to the MAC and who you've met along the way within the MAC. So Seton Hall, you have two people covering it, both yourself and Jaydens Regrets. Talk to me about how you two have gotten to know each other, and also great friends as well, because obviously you said earlier that your successor at St. Francis was the aforementioned Jaydens Regrets, and then all of a sudden you see him at Seton Hall. Speak about how that relationship formed.
It started when Jason followed me on Twitter.
No way.
Seriously. 2010, covering Big East Media Day. That's when Jason followed me on Twitter, and he was still at SOU his junior year. And then we met 2 months later when he came to St. John's to call a women's game that I was covering. And he and I obviously kept in touch over the years after that. After he graduated, he was working with New Jersey Newsroom covering Seton Hall, an outlet that since went under. And then after that went under, he was looking for a place to put his Seton Hall content. I opened the door to him, and he's been on staff for the last 5 years. He came on the Seton Hall in the Big East 15, 16.
That's wild stuff.
And I had recommended him to Brian Morales at St. Francis when he was looking for another guy to do PA while Seth and I handled the on-air duties. So I recommended Jason to him. Jason reached out, Brian reached out, and we got him into the family.
That's wild stuff. And again, just from a single click, you could now at one point you can ask somebody out, like a girl or a guy, on Twitter by just sliding right into their DMs and into their direct messages, and all of a sudden you get a job out of it. And just by one little follow, or by one whatever it may be, it's crazy how the world turns, and the connections that you make just by one little click. So now I want to speak about, and I know this one will be a while, but I still want to get into this because, as long as you have
Mm-hmm.
time, Jayden, I do as well. Speak about how Manhattan became a part of the Daly Dose of Hoops family, and speak about how the head coach there became a part of the family as well.
Okay, well, my first trip to Manhattan was actually Steve Masiellos' press conference in 2011. Steve Dombrowski, who is now the men's basketball media contact at St. John's, was at Manhattan at the time. When Masiello got the job, I had reached out to Steve, who I had known through Brian Bayer at Iona, to see if I could come up and cover the press conference. That worked out in my favor. And then first time I was there covering a game, I was there as a fan a couple months before that, was when Iona played Manhattan in 2012. Now, I had done a lot of Iona. I wanted to do some Manhattan too. It was reachable. It was within the city limits, and another school to add to the repertoire. And the more time I got to spend around Manhattan, the more of a family atmosphere it was. Christian Heimel was Manhattan's old play-by-play voice. He's almost like my brother in this industry, and he's in North Carolina now, working with the High Point Rockers in the Atlantic League, my minor league baseball team, and he's the assistant GM there actually.
Oh wow!
But Christian's a Hofstra guy that I had known through all the Hofstra people that split Red Storm sports games with me. We met at Manhattan. We hit it off pretty fast and became pretty close. And the reason why I got the Manhattan play-by-play gig was for circumstances that I wouldn't wish upon anybody. Christian had gone into the hospital with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2014-15. He beat it. Thank God. He's been cancer-free for over 5 years now. God bless him. But he recommended me to fill in for him whenever he had his medical treatments that precluded him from being on press row. And the year before that, actually, I was still covering Manhattan for the site. And I went up to a practice. Masiello said, "You covered too much Iona. We're going to convert you." And sure enough, the more time I spent around the team and the program, the more I got to know everybody. And Mass and I are a lot alike. He's probably had the most influence out of any coach I've covered. He's unlike any other person I've ever known. And it's very rare in this business to have a subject of your coverage break the fourth wall, so to speak, and you can consider him a true personal friend. And I'm so grateful for the bond that he and I have, because in 13-14 and 14-15, we also had similar circumstances. He was ostracized after the whole South Florida thing, and a lot of people kind of gave up on him and left him for dead. And that was when, right around the time that St. Francis went in another direction, didn't bring me back for 14-15. And it just so happened that I was able to spend more time around Manhattan. And he and I were almost in the same boat, two different situations, but the same backstory, so to speak. And I think that did a lot for the bond between he and I also, that has since remained probably stronger than any other coach I've covered, with all due respect to everybody else. If Jared Grasso's watching, I don't mean anything personal, because he's my guy too.
So now, obviously, with Jared Grasso, being at Iona, if I'm not mistaken, with Steve Masiello and the coaches that you have gotten to know on a personal level, not a lot of people in the media or on the media side can say that, a head coach is a personal friend, because usually, the coaches, they are subject to answer questions if someone wants to ask, as per the NCAA. That's what you have to do for an interview, for quotes, whatever it may be. But just one little thing, or not even a re-up in terms of bringing you back in Brooklyn Heights, has turned just a little confrontation, or just a little conversation, if you will, into a true friendship between, someone that works in the media, and a Division I head coach. really, really fantastic stuff. And again, as we said earlier, going back to your days at Monsignor McClancy, where you said, Jayden, where you couldn't figure out what you wanted to do, but you also thought, well, maybe, you know what, if you could have gone back and done it, well, then you might not have met Steve Masiello, and you might not have met, Jason Garrett, myself, Brian Morales, any of the guys that, that you and I both have mutual, relationships or work relationships or whatever with. You could have been elsewhere. You could have been in California. You could have been in Arizona. You could have been on the other side of the world. Who knows? So everything works for a reason. So now that we figured out your affiliation with the MAC and how you cover all of those games, basically all of those games, you were down in Atlantic City for the MAC tournament this past year. Now we're going to go off script a little bit, and I do want to ask this because this is now obviously, we are not at the height, but we're going down of the curve, if you will, flattening the curve, if you will. So it's already, I believe it's 68 or 69 total days since March 12th, since the inevitable, since I would say today's D-Day, honestly, and I don't say that lightly.
Since everything was ripped away from us.
Right, exactly. So with everything being ripped away from us 68 days later, you look back and you say to yourself, well, that was a little over 2 months ago, and you're down in Atlantic City. You didn't even make it up here for a Big East game because you were going to make it, if I'm not mistaken, for that Seton Hall game that night, Jayden. So now, what was going through your mind when you saw the whole list of things that happened on March 11th with Rudy Gobert, with Fred Hoiberg at Nebraska? It was just a cold, or it was just a flu or something like that, but it could have been COVID. We don't know. What was going through your mind there? And did you leave right away?
I'll tell you this. I thought about actually going up to the Garden for the St. John's Creighton game that only made it through halftime, but I was up until 4 a.m. writing a Greg Paulus piece up from his win at for Niagara the night before, and some other residual MAC stuff that I had to take care of. Decided to sleep in a little bit. I get up on the 12th and I see all the American canceled the night before. The Big Ten canceled that morning. The A-10 brings UMass and VCU out to the floor at a quarter after 11. 5 minutes later, they pull them back. The tournament's off. The SEC canceled. The Big Ten canceled. The ACC canceled and gives FSU a trophy presentation in the middle of the floor. And you got everybody from Florida State, Leonard Hamilton and all his players, standing there dumbfounded as if they have no idea what's happening. And let's be honest, Joe, nobody really did. And then in my hotel room, following the game I'm following the St. John's game on Twitter. I didn't even think to see if the TV had FS1, but I'm following Twitter. I'm following Zach Braziller. I'm following Adam Zagoria and everybody else that was up at the Garden. And I'm like, wow, what's going on here? And with everybody else canceled, once the ACC canceled, I came to the realization that everybody else was going to fall right in line. I didn't think the NCAA was in jeopardy yet, but little did I or any of us know. So I went down to the arena, Boardwalk Hall's like maybe 2 doors down from Caesars where I was staying. And I'll tell you, Joe, there was a women's game going on, a quarterfinal between Fairfield and Siena. And in 34 years on this earth, it's probably the most surreal thing I've seen on a sports front. I won't compare it to 9/11 because it's two totally different animals. But from a sports perspective, it's the most surreal thing I have ever seen. A game, it wasn't the game being played out in front of no fans, because I've been through a few of those before where there were only a select few in the seats, but just the backdrop and the circumstances and everybody else around the college basketball landscape, realizing that it's probably coming to an end and there's just no definitive timeline. It was like being inside a dream, but being coherent enough to know what was going on. It was surreal. And then after that game went final, Rich Enzer, the commissioner, after he called the presidents and athletic directors of each MAC university and college, canceled the tournament. And then 2 hours later, I get back to the room. I'm about to go to the buffet like I normally do. The NCAA tournament gets banged. I'm like, oh Jesus!
Yeah.
And there was just that 5 minute stretch where I'm on an empty Atlantic City boardwalk, just unsure of what to do with myself, and the wheels that were so far in motion that led to this moment. We were all swept up in a tsunami beyond our control. And the worst thing in the world, Joe, is to feel powerless and at someone else's mercy, unable to really comprehend what's going on and knowing you can't do anything about it. It's just an empty feeling. And I think I speak for everybody in the business when I say it was a real empty feeling. And I won't even get into schools like Hofstra and Rutgers, which I were able to cover. I got to spend a lot more time at Rutgers this past season. Programs that hadn't made the tournament in 19 and 29 years, respectively, and having that just snatched away from them, ripped out of their hearts. It's an empty feeling, Joe. That's the best way I can describe it. It's not the wording I want to use, but that's just what it was, what it felt like.
Yeah, no, and Jayden, and I can back that up because I remember when, obviously you were down on the boardwalk, you were down at Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City. And, not too long after, the casinos began to close. I believe it was a couple of days later, casinos were at half capacity. Then eventually they were just told to close, an ordinance from the governor. And then, that day, March 12th, and I was at Madison Square Garden, and I thought about, the night before, I was like, do I even want to risk it? I said, you know what, I'm going to go because, I have a media credential and I know only media was allowed to go in. And I thought to myself, this is going to be the wildest game I've ever seen. And I've been to hundreds of hockey games, hundreds of basketball games, baseball games, tens of football games. But it's just, you don't know what it's like where you have a big game such as the Big East tournament playing in Madison Square Garden in front of no fans. It's the weirdest thing. Not even with no fans, but you had obviously the family members, and it was, I believe, up to 200 people. So there was still a decent amount of people, but and when I say a decent amount of people in an 18,000 capacity Madison Square Garden, it's literally, you could hear a pin drop. So it's definitely a little weird, for sure, especially when the Garden was almost at capacity the night before, for that St. John's Georgetown game. And then Xavier and DePaul, with DePaul snapping their, I believe it was almost 7 or 8 year streak, 6 or 7 year streak, of not winning a Big East tournament game, at all. So, now we'll get to the today part again, but going back to your time at Seton Hall now, the reason why I want to go back to that, Jayden, is because this year was a year that they were ranked the whole year almost. I think they missed out. I think they were receiving votes maybe 1 or 2 weeks or something like that. It was
after the loss to Rutgers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. That was the time when Miles Powell had gotten the concussion. He didn't know why they were practicing at Rutgers. That was the report that came out from Adam Zagoria that day. I'll never forget it. And everyone thought that Seton Hall was in a free fall following that Rutgers loss. And I believe it was a 20-point loss, if I'm not mistaken, or in that range. So
20 exactly.
20 exactly, right. So with that being said, with Seton Hall, your time covering a team that is slowly climbing the ladder, this could be the year, Jayden, where you've covered Angel Delgado, you've covered Desi Rodriguez, you've covered Kadeem Carrington, you've covered those guys, and then eventually, you got here, and then they couldn't do it 2 years ago, so then they plateaued here. And then maybe they were able to go a little bit higher with Miles Powell, with Quincy McKnight, Romaro Gill, Sandro Mamukelashvili, Miles Kale. There's a lot of these guys that you look at the four that I mentioned, the three that I mentioned, Ro Gill, Quincy McKnight, and Miles Powell. Those three were the big three that are no longer there. And you said it before, Rutgers, Hofstra, they have their hearts pulled out right out of their chest. Because you've covered Seton Hall in almost every single game there this year, speak about what you think was going through their minds, because you've covered them and you know those guys better than anyone, about what they'd be going through with this whole thing, where they were in the running for a Sweet 16 bid.
At the very minimum, this was a group that, especially after how the regular season ended, losing to Villanova and then losing at Creighton in the last game of the year, where an outright Big East championship was on the line had Seton Hall won. I think that was a team that would have came out and taken no prisoners in the Big East tournament. If anybody was going to beat Seton Hall in the Big East tournament, it would have been Providence, because Providence was on as much of a roll, if not more, down the stretch than Seton Hall. And I think that was a group, Joe, and it hurts to say after how everything played out, this was a group that would have gone to the second weekend in the tournament, probably would have made a regional final, be it here or anywhere else, and could very well have gone to Atlanta for a Final Four.
Yeah, that's extremely wild. And, to say that with, Seton Hall in the early 90s, with PJ Carlesimo at the helm and everything, and, and going to a national championship and, or going to a Final Four rather, it's just, it stings. It stings when, this could have been it. A lot of people in the beginning or last year calling for Kevin Willard's head and, saying, well, is he going to take the Virginia Tech job when Buzz Williams went out to Texas? Or he went to, I believe it was
A&M.
Texas A&M, right? So yeah, Texas A&M. So right, so still in the Lone Star State, but just one school off. So it's rough when you have to prove something like that. And now next year you have guys that are coming in, Bryce Aiken. You have a lot of guys, Sandro Mamukelashvili testing the NBA waters. Now the chance, Jayden, that Seton Hall comes back to, I would say, the new full strength. Are you going to be able to cover Seton Hall? Are we going to be able to cover Seton Hall? Are we even going to be able to get into the building? What's it going to be like, do you think? What is the new normal going to be like?
I've been very optimistic over the last 2 months, partially for my own salvation, because I'm just a very positive person. I don't like to see a lot of negativity within my field, and a lot of people projecting doom and gloom. That's just not me. I feel like there's going to be a way out of everything, and I do think there will be a season. I can't tell you how it's going to look. It's going to look and feel much different, unlike anything you or I or the majority of our counterparts have ever seen and felt before. But to tell you the truth, Joe, here I am on May 18th. I'm telling you, it's still way too early to survey the landscape now on May 18th and forecast what it's going to be like on opening night, November 10th, because there's still a lot of time left. There's 6 months. A lot can happen in 6 months. A lot can happen in 6 weeks, 6 days. What you and I see in front of us now is not going to look the same on May 25th, a week from now. It's going to be completely different. Well, not completely different, but it's going to be tangibly different. There are still a lot of factors that need to be sifted through, the logistics of which have to be figured out. I think maybe by the end of next month, the beginning of July, you'll start to see a rough draft, a framework, if you will, of what the season could be like. But honestly, Joe, there's really no description I can give you until we're actually out there living it in November.
Now, you speak about, it's too early to forecast what the new normal will look like, rather. But is it too early to give the Pirate Nation a little forecast of what they're going to expect on the court 2020, 2021? Let's hear your thoughts, Jayden, about what the post Miles Powell era might look like to you.
Well, Seton Hall's not going to be the Big East favorite this season like it was a year ago.
Wow, that is a bold prediction.
Villanova brings almost everybody back and could very well be the preseason number one in the nation. So Seton Hall, I do think, slides in third, maybe fourth. Kevin Willard does have a very strong core back. You mentioned Sandro Mamukelashvili. You mentioned Miles Cale. Jared Rhoden is going into his junior year. He's probably going to average close to a double-double. Bryce Aiken, the graduate transfer from Harvard, is going to run the point. The transfer that nobody's talking about who sat out last year, to Carl Molson from Canisius, someone that I've covered in depth because he spent 2 years in the MAC and was a first-team all-conference selection his sophomore year before transferring. He's going to be the one replacing Miles Powell. He'll be a guy that averages 12, 13 points a game, maybe 5 or 6 rebounds in the Big East. He's going to be a very serviceable wing, a very good shot, a little bit of a work in progress from outside, but he fits the mold for Seton Hall. He's going to make a difference right away. Tyrese Samuel goes into his sophomore year. Aiko Biagu is probably going to be the guy Kevin Willard looks at to make the same kind of progress that Roe Gill made over the offseason into this past season, making a jump with a full season under his belt. Shavar Reynolds is the most underrated defender in the conference, maybe even the nation. And his story from walk-on and Jersey native whose father is in the Navy and stationed overseas to the buzzer beater against St. John's and the shenanigans, if you will, from Michael Stevens on the whistle. And if you follow my Twitter, you know that brand pretty well. And then back to Shavar Reynolds. Let's get back to business here. From that shot, earning a scholarship and becoming a trusted option, not just on defense, but on offense too, making clutch shots. He's an X factor for Seton Hall, and I don't think there's going to be much of a drop-off. I do think the Pirates make the tournament. It'll be 5 straight tournaments, and if not for everything being flushed away this year, would have been 6. I don't think there's too much of a drop-off. 20 wins in a tournament is not an unrealistic set of expectations. I think it's reasonable. I think it's attainable, and I think it's doable.
So you heard that, fans. So just to clarify, Jayden, you believe that Seton Hall will be the preseason Big East champion?
No, I think they'll be third.
They'll be third.
And Creighton
Okay.
will be 1 and 2.
Okay. I was just making sure because you did cut out a little bit there, and that's why my comment was wow. That was my reaction, because it sounded like you said that they would be in the preseason coaches poll. They would be number 1, and I was like, oh, that is a bold statement. So
no, that was last year.
That was last year, right? Yes, that was last year, exactly. So now, with that being said, so for those that were watching from the Seton Hall Pirates page, cannot thank you enough. But now with everything going on with now with this COVID thing and the new normal, Jayden. Now I know that, as you said, it's too early to forecast any of this, but now for the MAC, for instance. Let's talk about Iona for a quick second. And Iona now has a brand new head coach, because a man that you've covered for however many years in Tim Cluse is now gone. And be that as it may, Tim Cluse is one of the best coaches in the MAC and one of the best coaches that the MAC has seen. No offense to Steve Masiellos, your personal friend, but the championships in the MAC speak for itself. And I think
he'll even tell you that Tim is the best coach this conference has had over the last decade. And it's not even close, honestly. 6 NCAA tournaments, 5 MAC championships. What he's done for Iona hadn't been done since the late Jim Valvano was up there. And Tim Kluse, what he's done for that program and how he has consistently won everywhere he's been, there's something to be said for that.
Right. So, and for those that do not know, Jim Valvano, Jimmy V, the usual. So now with Rick Pitino taking over. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the same Rick Pitino that won and then had it taken away and stripped the 2013 NCAA tournament. He was Louisville was a national champion, and then they weren't. And then Louisville had a little, problems in terms of the legal department and in terms of scandals. Rick Pitino has, he brings a lot of baggage to New Rochelle. Let's speak about the forecast for Iona and for the Gales fans watching you here, Jayden.
Well, Rick Pitino is fortunate to have a core coming back. Isaiah Washington and Asante Gist in the backcourt with Isaiah Ross on the wing. Those three players will set the tone for Iona. And what Pitino did reshaping the roster, he's got 7 commitments in this recruiting class, 2 more from 2021. He made short work in retooling the roster. Now it's going to be getting them on campus, which obviously hasn't been able to happen in the wake of everything going on beyond basketball, and developing team chemistry. That's going to be the key for Iona, how soon the newcomers mesh with the incumbents. I do think Iona's a top half MAC team either way. It might take a little bit to get going, just having to make up for lost time in the wake of circumstances beyond everybody's control. But I do think Pitino makes a difference. I've been fortunate to cover him from when he was in the Big East before Louisville left. So I know what he brings to the table. And for casual MAC fans, it's going to be an eye-opener.
I can't wait to see it, honestly, because if, again, with the new normal and with everything going on, the fans may not have a chance to see Rick Pitino because of the aforementioned new normal. Or, Jayden, your thought, if there are fans, if there are games, whatever the case may be, with everything that Rick Pitino has brought with him from Louisville and also from Greece, does he get suspended by the NCAA? Will we see him on opening night for Iona with you covering him?
Well, they'll be on the road, so I won't see him on opening night unless I go to wherever Iona's playing. But we don't know. We don't know what kind of a suspension he'll get if he gets one, whether it's NCAA imposed, whether it's self-imposed. We still don't know. It's just like everything else in sports these days, Joe, a fluid situation. We don't know if there will be fans. I'm venturing to guess that there probably won't be, at least not right away. So a lot of unknowns out there right now. And I don't think anything can be close to normal until we get a closer indication and a better look of where everything stands before we figure out what's what and who's who.
So now that we've figured out who Jaden Daly is and who you have been covering for the last 11 years for Daly Dose of Hoops, we now know that a lot of the schools in the area, Iona, Fordham, Manhattan, Hofstra, Rutgers, you have gotten to cover hundreds of games, Jayden, and the 141 game season was what year again?
That was 15-16, where we had Providence and Brooklyn doing first and second round tournament games and Philadelphia doing the East Regional. I was fortunate to get a lot of double and triple headers there. So it looks like a stacked game count, but as far as an overall scheduling load, it wasn't really a game a night. It just came out that way because of the multiple game nights rather. Yeah, 141 is not something I might do again. I think I'll do 100 and something this year just because I missed so much, but off season to recover.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because that really is a lot to do. That is insane amount to do. But
I was burned out for a while.
Oh, I can't even imagine. And you think next year, Jayden, and this is something else that I'm going to throw your way here. Next year, you have in the first and second round is at the Dunk, is at the home of the Providence Friars at Dunkin' Donuts Center. And then Jaden Daly, the East Regional is at Barclays Center. Do we see you? Do we see you there, both at the Dunk and at the Barclays Center?
99% chance, yes.
Yeah, I kind of had a feeling with that. So now that you said that 141 games is most likely not going to happen again, do you have an average that you look for and a certain like a specific set of teams that you want to cover? Is it the good teams? Obviously it would be the good teams, but do you have, a specific bias towards a specific team that, we should know about?
Well, when I did the 141, I did anything and everything in the area. Now, as I've become more seasoned and noticed who's better for web traffic, I'll look at my core programs, which are Seton Hall, St. John's, Iona, Manhattan, Hofstra, and Rutgers, especially this coming season, will be a point of emphasis. Likely top 25 preseason team. Steve Heichel brings about everybody back. It's a little bit of a pain to get to sometimes, Piscataway, but it's doable. So I'll be at the rack a few times, Stony Brook maybe a couple times as well. And also Monmouth. I love going down the Jersey Shore. That's one of my favorite fan bases in all of college basketball. I have to shout out all the Monmouth fans. If anybody happened to straddle across my Twitter and see this link, I'm sure a couple of them are watching, and they'll come back at me later saying thanks for the support, because they've loved me since they were in the NEC. I'll be down there on December 17th because Carolina's going to be up there. So
it's a no-brainer for you to get there.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I'll walk to West Long Branch that night if I have to.
if you can't, right? If you can't get a bus or you can't get a public transportation or anything along those lines. So that's pretty good. So Jayden, that's all amazing stuff. And for those that are watching that do not know Jaden Daly, and for those that are normal viewers and frequent viewers of our podcast, we cannot thank you enough for tuning in. Just a few more questions for Jayden before we will say goodnight to him. But now with the season coming up, obviously, I'm assuming you answered the question, but I do want to ask it again. The MAC team that you look forward to covering the most, is it Iona or is it your personal friend Steve Masiellos this year?
It's a tie between Iona and Siena.
Yes, Siena, yes, because I believe they were considered the MAC champions this year.
Siena this past season really took the first step toward reclaiming its perch atop the MAC. Carmen Massarello, who was a player at Siena, an assistant coach, now the head coach, he's seen the program from all facets, and he grew up outside Albany in Clifton Park too, so he's a homegrown talent. And if you sit in a press conference with him, you'll see how much it means to him to coach the program. He's got the defending player of the year in Jalen Pickett. He has a double-double average in Manny Camper, who's coming back for his senior season. He's testing the NBA waters right now, but I think he comes back at the end of the day ultimately. Don Carey is an underrated wing player. Siena has the perfect mid-major complement for a team that could get a 12 or a 13 and pull off an upset on Thursday or Friday in the first round next season if all goes well. A lot of it has to do with scheduling. A MAC team hasn't been that high since Manhattan in 2014, but I do think the after 20-win season of this last year and turn it into something else to look forward to in the Capital Region. I really do.
Well, are we going to, and I'm assuming Siena will be seeing Jaden Daly in Loudonville a few times, I'd assume?
If I can get up to the Times Union Center for a weekend game, I will try. It's harder with everything else closer to home going on. Definitely the Iona and Manhattan games, and very possible the trip down to Monmouth. Siena's just a hard sell because it's a 4-hour bus trip to Albany. So a lot has to go the right way. The stars have to align a certain way. The wheels have to be in just a precise motion to get me up there. I've done it once for a regular season game in 5 years when the MAC tournament was up in Albany at Times Union. So it's not uncharted territory or unfamiliar waters by any means. It's just a little more out of the way, so to speak.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And for those that are watching, I do want to ask this question to you, Jayden. I remember last year when you were up at the Times Union Center one night and you came home, got a couple hours of sleep, and then had gone to the Garden on quarterfinal Thursday. And I remember, if I'm not mistaken, you had about maybe an hour's sleep. You got off the bus around 5 a.m. and then you had gone to the Garden. For those, I would say, aspiring sportscasters or media writers or anything along those lines, what's your best advice to those that, well, should they be following in my footsteps in waking up at 5 a.m. and going to quarterfinal Thursday? Or, or what would be your best advice now, May 18th with, Corona going around and how to stay healthy and everything along those lines?
You talked about that trip 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, I remember, I think it was last year. Yeah, I guess it was 2 years ago, maybe, or the year before, where I remember seeing you and you told me, you were like, Joe, I just came from Times Union Center. I was up there like less than 10 hours ago. I was like, what? What are you doing here?
It was actually Friday night quarterfinals in the MAC, and it wasn't the Garden, it was Prudential. Seton Hall played Villanova at 12 o'clock.
Okay.
I got in at 7 a.m, recharged the batteries for about an hour, found my way into Jersey, actually took an Uber into Jersey.
Wow.
Yeah, if that doesn't show how much of a degenerate I am, I don't know what will. Got to Prudential at probably the under 12 timeout in the first half, and Seton Hall ended up beating Villanova that day. That was crazy. I don't know if I'll ever do anything like that again. Jeez.
Well, especially now because you are a seasoned veteran, now everyone knows you. Now I think you have proved yourself, especially after that game, that you really can be everywhere, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I had 11 years under my belt then. I wasn't some hotshot rookie either. So you might want to have me tested. You might want to find out what the heck is wrong with me. But as far as advice to the up and coming generation, I say this all the time. Be the first you. Nobody's looking for the next so-and-so. It's great to have influences, and it's great to emulate some of the luminaries of our industry and some of the founding fathers of professional broadcasting, but nobody's looking to hire the next Dick Enberg, the next Pat Summerall, the next Joe Buck, Jim Nance, what have you, whoever you idolize. They're looking for originality. They're looking for someone who can inject his or her own flavor, his or her own into the nuts and bolts of the job. Be the first. Originality. You want to differentiate yourself. You want to establish yourself and set yourself apart. So when you're looking for a job in whatever field, whether it's the broadcast media, the print media, even behind the scenes, you want to differentiate yourself and leave enough of an impression so that whomever's making decisions can say, hey, this person is unlike any other that I've seen since I advertised the opening. And I say it to the SJU Radio kids that have come after us and even after me and before you. Nobody's looking for a carbon copy. Be yourself. Don't try to be something you're not. Be yourself and the rest will come. I really believe that.
Yeah, as long as you follow the road, you have faith, you can, you're able to do it. That is key. Really love the advice, Jayden. Amazing stuff because, again, I know for a fact, I look to you sometimes for advice if I'm completely in the ditch. I have texted you before asking, what do I do? It's just, everyone helps each other in this business. It is a very cutthroat industry. That is, how it is.
Oh,
But
yes, it is.
at some point though, sometimes we are all colleagues at the end of the day. And, we don't give each other secrets. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, whatever the case is. But, just a little bit of advice, or a little bit, as you've said, you're not a negative person, but just that little uplift that someone may need could go a really long way. Jayden, now that summer is right around the corner, I've been keeping a tally on this between our show, between the Zoom interview series of the Primetime Rundown, and also another project that I've been working on behind the Terriers for Terrier Sports Network at St. Francis College, Brooklyn. Favorite ice cream flavor. So far we have one chocolate, one Rocky Road. Cecil Shorts was, I believe, Rocky Road. And then we also had mint chocolate chip. That was men's soccer head coach Tom Giovanni. And then also men's volleyball head coach Nico Lambert was also, I believe, mint chocolate chip as well. I got to rewatch that, so I'll eventually get the correct tally. But I'm going to ask you this question, Jayden. What is your favorite ice cream flavor?
Believe it or not, and this is going to be a first for you, coffee.
Wow. All right. So that's going to be written down there as coffee. Pretty good. Okay. All right. So so that is definitely a first. So mint chocolate chip 1, Jaydens Daily coffee 1. And the final question, because Jayden, I can't thank you enough for being here, and for spending this evening with me here. Really, really fun stuff. I know for a fact, I don't even have to ask you this. The Last Dance. It is absolutely amazing. And I thought it was just a fantastic documentary. And, I think between you and I, and really, I think this is a bold statement for me, and I think you can either back me up or completely or argue with me on it. Documentaries are going to have a little bit of a hard time trying to replicate something so powerful than what we've seen the last 10 episodes.
Oh, I agree. What you saw from The Last Dance is very unprecedented. And for someone as notoriously guarded as Michael Jordan was, off the court at least, because on the court, nobody could touch him. But for someone as routinely guarded and as notoriously cordoned off in his personal life, to get that kind of access is truly revealing. You don't see that very much from any player these days. And I think now, post-COVID, locker room access as we know it, I think is now going to be a thing of the past. I think it's going to be a lot more structured, a lot more sterile in light of everything that's gone on. I do think that any other documentary that tries to live up to this has its work cut out for it, just because the sheer subject volume and magnitude of behind the scenes, it's going to be very hard to match. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's just it's difficult, and you said it, because I remember obviously at the Garden, March 11th, the locker room access was cut. It was remember when we were talking to LJ Figueroa with St. John's following the 23-0 run on March 11th that night against Georgetown, in that magnificent win that sealed Mike Anderson's 17th consecutive season of not losing, with not a losing record, going back all the way to Arkansas, Mizzou, wherever he was. You're almost 10 feet away from the guy, and you're basically shouting, "Hey, LJ!" It's crazy, and and you have to have the proper equipment to, you have to zoom in. It's similar, and I know, Jayden, you're a NASCAR fan, and similar to what you saw yesterday when Kevin Harvick won, where they had Regan Smith interview Kevin Harvick, and he was almost 7 or 8 feet away from Kevin and his car, but they were holding almost like a stick to get to speak with Kevin Harvick. Jayden, did we lose you? Jayden, did we lose you there? We might have lost Jaydens Daily here. I don't know where Jayden is.
There.
We got you back. Yes, you are here. Don't know what happened there, but looks like you are back. I think we've got you. Yeah. All right. Yep. You got me, Jayden?
Yeah, a little hard to hear, but I got you now.
All right, good. So what we were talking about earlier, or just a few seconds ago, was you were talking about locker rooms being a thing of the past, and we were talking about just before with St. John's beating Georgetown and going on that 23-0 run. Where Mike Anderson secured his 17th consecutive winning season, going all the way back to Arkansas and Mizzou and whatnot. You have that massive gap of, when we're trying to speak to Rasheem Dunn, LJ Figueroa, and I think we're more than 6 feet away. And, you have to have the proper equipment to really hold that microphone. And I compared it to yesterday, because I know you're a NASCAR fan. And Kevin Harvick, when he was interviewed following the win at Darlington, and Regan Smith had to stand almost 10 feet back, and it was dead silent. It was dead silent in or on the racetrack. And Kevin obviously wasn't wearing a mask for obvious reasons. He was in a car that was almost over 100 degrees, but it's crazy how you think that could be now the thing of the future. Is similar to what we saw yesterday.
Yeah, it's just really hard to fathom, Joe, in terms of how the interviews and the audio and the content are going to be generated. It's going to be a new science, so to speak, of how to work it out from a reasonable logistical standpoint, at least until all this blows over. We're looking at probably a few months of this, at least best case scenario, where you're going to have to be a lot more creative as an interviewer, as a writer or reporter or whatever, in terms of getting it done and finding the means to get it done. I think that's going to be the bigger hurdle than actually doing it. It's just a matter of how you're able to do it and what you're able to do it with. I think being creative here and being innovative is going to be what comes into play a little more than usual now.
Last and most final question. Are you happy that NASCAR is back, or at least a single sport is back? Looks like we may have lost Jayden one more time. Hold on 1 second. Okay, Jayden, we got you back. So I don't know if did you hear the question that I had asked?
Yes. I had you briefly about NASCAR being back on.
Yes. So now, because obviously NASCAR is back, that is one of your favorite sports. With that being back, how excited are you that something is back that you could look forward to, and it's a live event, no less?
I'll tell you, Joe, it's like my world has been reborn. I finally have something again, just to fill the void. The off season's always a rough time because there's not much going on. Hockey, after the Rangers either get knocked out of the playoffs or don't even make it, like the last couple of years, and then baseball drags on through the summer, and it doesn't really get interesting until September and October. So just to have something now at this time of year to fill the void, especially something like NASCAR that I try to watch religiously, goes a long way. It really does.
That's really, really good, and it helps with getting back into the swing of things in terms of sports. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Jaden Daly from Daly Dose of Hoops, the creator of Daly Dose of Hoops, who was at one point a part of the St. John's family, who will always be a part of the St. John's family, who was at one point a part of the St. Francis College Brooklyn family, and is currently also a part of the United States Merchant Marine Academy family. Jaden Daly. Jayden, cannot thank you enough for joining me here and spending the last hour and 34 minutes with me here on the Eastern Observer. Cannot thank you enough, buddy.
Joe, my pleasure, brother. Please stay safe, you and yours. All the best. Love you, bro, and we'll catch up sometime soon. A few months down the road, it'll be here. Soon you and I will realize it. Thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Love you too, brother. Listen, yeah, for sure. Just stay on as soon as we do the closing credits, and then we'll speak after. Ladies and gentlemen, again, cannot thank Jaden Daly enough for joining us right here on episode number 13 of the Primetime Rundown Zoom interview series. Our next show, episode number 14 of the aforementioned Primetime Rundown Zoom interview series, will feature NBC Sports California color analyst of the San Jose Sharks, Brett Hedican. For those that do not know, Brett Hedican was a part of the 2006 Carolina Hurricanes Stanley Cup team. So he will be joining us here on Thursday, May 21st, starting at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. Please tune in here to the Eastern Observer and also on the Blackjack Media Networks. For more information, log on to theeasternobserver.com. Also, episode number 26 of the Primetime Rundown will feature myself, Nick Partain, Tyler Adele on Friday night on May 22nd. That will begin at 6 p.m. all the way until 8 p.m. And also tune in tomorrow night for episode number 3 of the Essential Wrestling Podcast. Tyler Adele and Al Carl will have that right here for you on the Eastern Observer. For more information, please follow us on Twitter at Observe Eastern, and also log on to our website, theeasternobserver.com. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time for Jaden Daly and for all of us at the Eastern Observer and the Blackjack Media Networks, I'm Joey Jarzynka. We'll see you next time.